Hello and welcome to another video. In this one, I'm going to be giving my thoughts and review of Season 2 of The Rings of Power. This has been one of the more popular shows, I would say, in many senses of the word, over the past few years, and we got and wrapped up Season 2 just the other day. So I wanted to share my review on the series as a pretty big Lord of the Rings fan. So let's get ready. Let's jump in. Really briefly, before I do get into my review of Season 2, I really enjoyed Season 1. I thought it was pretty good overall. I had some issues with it here and there, had some slow pacing. Some of the storylines were, not as compelling, I think, as others. But in the end, I thought it was a well-executed show, and I was really excited to see where things might go in Season 2. Now, jumping in, we're going into Season 2. I was really surprised and impressed with this season. I definitely still have my issues with the show in some areas, which I'll get into a little bit later in the video. But overall, I still think it's a really good, if not venturing into the great territory. Before I get too far into things, I do want to get your thoughts as well in the comments down below of what you thought of this season. Please be as nice as possible. I know this show kind of has a wide range of reactions and responses and opinions about and on it. So be nice and friendly in the comments down below. We can all have different opinions on this show, and we don't need to pick a fight over it. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this season. I would love to know how you would rate it. So when you boil it down, for this season specifically, it's carrying on pretty much all the same storylines we got established in Season 1, but there's primarily three stories we're focusing on. We have the story of the Rings of Power, we have the story of Numenor, and then we have the story of the Stranger and the Harfoots. So the story of the Rings of Power was the primary focus of this season. Is where we got to spend the majority of the time. So we now know, quick warning, I will be spoiling Season 1 stuff here. So if for some reason you're watching this video and you haven't seen Season 1, I will be spoiling some stuff here. So now that we know who Sauron is as a character, we get a lot more work and development on that character, which I thought was really interesting. We got introduced as well to Celebrimbor towards the end of last season, who is the one who will eventually forge these Rings of Power that we get to see in Season 2, which is really cool. And Sauron goes under this disguise as Annatar, as kind of this being who has come and has been sent by the Valar to kind of guide Celebrimbor on this journey of forging these rings. And so that was probably my favorite storyline that we got to focus on this season, this journey between Annatar, Sauron, and Celebrimbor. I thought all of the development that we got to get with their characters was really cool, really interesting. Celebrimbor was probably one of, if not my favorite characters this season. All of the work that we got to do on his character as he is kind of fulfilling this purpose and desire that he's had to do something truly great with his talent as a smith of the elves and one of the greats, and forging these Rings of Power to bring just overall betterness to the world and the people of Middle-earth was really cool. So the time we got to spend in Eregion with the two of them was really interesting, and some of my favorite stuff we got character and storytelling wise this season. Still along with that story, but in a couple different locations, we have the continued journey with Elrond and Galadriel. They kind of go in and out of each other's stories throughout this season, and I thought their stuff was good too. They're not the main focus this season, as I feel like they kind of were last season. We spent, like I said, the majority of our time on Annatar and Celebrimbor. Is still really good, I think. Besides that, we go into Khazad-dûm a lot more with Prince Durin, and we get a lot more of the dynamic with him and his father, King Durin, and their relationship. As I said, a lot of the story around this season revolves around the dwarven rings that Celebrimbor and Annatar forge. And so they give one of these rings to King Durin, and it really has quite an impact on him this season. He's really focused on using it to just better overall dwarven kind, where Durin is more hesitant because of what he's been warned of through Elrond and stuff. And so we kind of get them butting heads, and just the overall dynamic of their development and their relationship this season I thought was really good and really interesting as well. And then with the, Elrond, Galadriel stuff, and with the Sauron stuff, we get kind of in the middle of all of that Adar's character, which was a recast for this season. The actor that portrayed him in season 1 did not come back for season 2, so they recasted him. I definitely missed the actor. I'm not sure who he was that played him first season, because I thought he was really great. Definitely one of the best performances we got last season. The guy who came in this season did a really good job. It's a very similar but slightly different portrayal of the character, but I still think he was definitely one of the more interesting characters that we got to explore throughout this season, as he is making it his purpose to find and stop Sauron, but he's trying to figure out these alliances that he's going to have along the way and getting some kind of trust from the elves and the dwarves and the people. So that's the main Rings of Power storyline. Besides that, we get more of a look with the Numenor people as they have returned to Numenor now, and we essentially kind of get a struggle of power for leadership over their people as the main focus this season, as well as a little bit of a look back to Isildur, as he was left behind because he was suspected dead at the end of season 1 in Middle-earth. So we get some stuff with him, as well as Arondir, the elf that stayed with him. So we get a little bit more of their stuff, as well as the struggle for power that we kind of get explored throughout this season. And then finally, the third story, we focus on the Stranger and the Harfoots, and they're kind of trying to help find a sense of identity for the Stranger, and just, you know, dealing with some stuff and some new friends and enemies along the way. So now let's get into what I liked versus what I didn't like this season. As far as what I liked, the Rings of Power stuff was great. Like I said, that was the main focus, the main storyline that we got to just stay with for the majority of this season. I thought all of that was really cool. The depth that we got to have with the work that goes into the forging of these rings was really cool. It was a really neat, just attention to detail. All of the sequences when we're watching them forge these rings were just so engaging and so interesting. I just was enamored with the visual aesthetic of forging these rings. It was really cool. And then besides that, character-wise, Celebrimbor, I think, is one of, if not the standout from this season. I thought he was the most interesting character, and he is one of the characters we get to spend the most time with this season. Like I said, his journey all throughout this season was really interesting and really tragic in a lot of different ways too. As you know, he's deceived by Sauron posing as Anatar all throughout this season to forge these rings of power to bring greatness into Middle-earth, and it's just being deceived all along the way. So all of the stuff with his character was, while as tragic as it was, really interesting and thought-provoking all throughout at the same time. We get a lot more with Sauron this season, as we found out, you know, who he was at the end of season 1. Now we know, and he is going full sprint on his mission to bring this personal sense of peace to Middle-earth. So I thought all of that stuff with his character was really great as well. And then, as I mentioned, with the dwarves, Durin, Prince and King Durin, all of their stuff was really cool. I loved the father-son dynamic of their relationship. We don't get to spend as much time with Durin, Prince Durin, and Elrond together this season. They are still fairly main characters throughout the show, but we don't get as much scenes with them interacting with each other, which was a bummer, because that was my favorite relationship and aspect probably of season 1, was the two of them together. But what they do with Prince Durin and King Durin and all of the Khazad-dûm stuff was really cool, and I really liked a lot of what we got to explore with that. And we really get to start seeing the power that these rings can have over different races, as the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit series was very men-centric and focused with the one ring and stuff, but it's cool to get to see what the other rings are capable of doing with some race like the dwarves. And then, as I think I briefly mentioned, Adar and Elendil, another great bunch of characters we got to explore some really cool stuff with. Adar was one of my favorite characters in season 1, so it was really cool to get more stuff with his character in season 2. Looking at the more epic and scope of things, I think the fight sequences, the battles, the combat sequences, all of that stuff was really fantastic this season. They really showcased it in the first season with that one battle sequence episode that we got, but it was really cool to get more of it this season. I think we got some really great battles, really great fights throughout. Essentially, the last 2 episodes of the season for season 2 were just this epic, massive battle, and I thought all of that was really great. I saw this one statement made online, and I think I agree with it, that the battles that they're orchestrating and executing in season 2, or I guess Rings of Power in general, really have surpassed that of the Hobbit movies. I enjoy the Hobbit movies for what they are. They're definitely a step down from the Lord of the Rings films, but it was really cool to get a more tangible and gritty and just authentic feeling battles in Rings of Power from the very CGI heavy ones that we had in the series for the Hobbit movies. And then lastly, on what I liked, I really love the music for this series. It's composed by Bear McCreary. I've enjoyed a lot of his other work, but I think what he's doing in Rings of Power is so good. The separate individual like character motifs and themes that we get throughout this series are really good, and they're just adding a lot of depth and world building to the series through the music. And as you know, as anyone would know as a fan of the Lord of the Rings or just Middle-earth in general, music is a big part of it. So we get a lot of really cool stuff musically as they develop these themes and just grow and add more depth to them. We get some more singing sequences with characters like Tom Bombadil, which if you've seen the trailers, you know he pops up at some point in the show. So it's just really cool, clever stuff that they get to do. And he's really creative with the music throughout Middle-earth as someone who's a massive fan of the James Horner score. And then jumping into a couple of the things I didn't like about this season. While I do think the overall pacing is an improvement over season one had a very slow start, but once it started rolling, it was really good. This season, we're in it from pretty early on, but my issue with the pacing is when we are focused on the main story with the Rings of Power and even the Numenor stuff for the most part, anytime we jump away to the story of the Harfoots and the Stranger, I feel like it screeches to a halt and we just lose all pacing and sense of focus on the series. So while the pacing is overall stronger this season, I think there's some storylines they need to do a better job with to maintain that sense of direction and pacing throughout. And with the Stranger and Harfoot storyline, that's going to be my other big complaint from this season is I unfortunately just don't care very much about this storyline. I was interested in it in season one as we were trying to figure out who all of these characters are, the play that they're going to have in this world. Now that we kind of know, we found out what we found out, which I won't spoil quite yet until we can get a little bit of things out of the way. I don't care enough about this storyline to feel like it's necessarily justified to keep in the show. And my reasoning for that comes down to, I don't think they spend enough time on that story. I don't think they develop it enough. But what I actually did as an experiment to kind of see if it was just me or if it was actually true is I felt like we didn't spend enough time on some of the other stories. So what I did is I scrubbed through every episode 1 through 7 and just kind of did a rough time count of how much time we spend on each of those main storylines. So like I said, we have the Rings of Power, we have Numenor, and we have the Stranger and the Harfoots. For what all is included in episodes 1 through 7 of this show, we have roughly 7 hours of runtime. For 4+ hours of that, about 4.5 hours max, I would say, that is focused on the Rings of Power storyline. So you got Celebrimbor, Sauron, Galadriel, Elrond, the dwarves, all that stuff, Adar. That's 4+ hours of runtime in this show. After that, it drops down to maybe an hour to an hour and a half each for the Numenor stuff and the Stranger and the Harfoot stuff. In the scale of a show where you're going to be telling a number of pretty big stories and stuff like that, I feel like they needed a little bit more balance with those. Yes, you have your main plot of this Sauron forging of the Rings of Power and stuff, but if we're going to do stuff like Numenor, if we're going to do stuff like the Stranger and the Harfoots, you got to balance that out a little better, I think. Now, it's kind of a double-edged sword with this one, because while that's my biggest complaint, that they don't get too much time with it, I didn't mind it because I cared so little about those other stories that were taking place, because I care so much more about the main plot line with the Rings of Power and the forging of them and all that stuff. But that's probably my biggest complaint about this season, is just I don't care enough about the subplots and some of the side stories that are happening to feel like any time we spend with them is worth it. I'd just rather get back to the main story that's happening. So I'd be curious if specifically anyone else kind of noticed that or felt the same way about those subplots and stories as well. So all of that said, before we jump into some spoiler talk, I do kind of want to give an indication as to what I thought about this show overall rating wise. So if I remember right, I think I gave season 1 of Rings of Power a 7 out of 10. I'm still in a similar camp, but I do think overall this season was an improvement over season 1. So I'm somewhere in the 8 out of 10 territory for what I thought and would rate season 2 as. So with that, let's jump into some spoiler talk and some of the cool spoilery stuff that we got this season as well. Mostly, I just want this to be my excuse to talk about the finale and what all went down. That whole final battle sequence was fantastic. It was incredible. I felt like I was watching almost Lord of the Rings again. It was pretty close to being on that level. So that was really cool as someone who's a fan of the Lord of the Rings movies. And then where they wrapped things up with some of the different stories for this season, I thought was really interesting. Obviously, we lost Adar this season, which is a bummer because he was one of my favorite characters in this show. But he went out with a bang, that's for sure. Well, a lot of stabs. But I thought what they did with his character was really interesting throughout this show as someone who's coming in as a recasted actor. So you have to, kind of build off of what was said before in season one, as well as bring your own story into this season. I thought he did a really good job. I thought his whole journey of trying to defeat Sauron and figure out these alliances with trying to make some kind of alliance with Elrond and Galadriel was really interesting. And just the lengths and stuff he's willing to try to go to defeat Sauron because he knows how bad it can be. And so all the stuff we got with Adar's character was really cool. I was talking about the Prince and King Durin storyline. All of their stuff was really cool. It's just the betrayal that Prince Durin felt from his father of his choosing of this ring of power to seek the greatness for the dwarves as best as possible, which is a valiant thing to do, but the way he was going about it and then the lack of care that he had for his people that Durin felt was really interesting. So their whole father-son dynamic was really great throughout this season. King Durin gets to go out like an absolute boss, which was awesome. He gets to go down fighting a Balrog, which, like, what better end can you ask for such a cool character? I really hope we get to see more Balrog stuff in the coming season, because I feel like how can that be the end of it? But that was a really great send-off for that character. I'm really interested to see what they're going to do now with Prince Durin going forward, because as we got to see, his father basically said, you lead these people now. You're a better leader than I could be. But we also got that tease of some of the other dwarven leaders think he doesn't have lay claim to the throne and others are interested in it. So I think that's going to be really interesting going into season 3. And then speaking of characters going out with a bang, Celebrimbor, oh my gosh, that dude went through it this season, especially in that finale. Sauron is such an interesting character, I think. I'm really interested to see what we keep getting to see with him now that Celebrimbor is out of the way and Adar's out of the way. Like, this guy's ready to take over. So I'm really interested to see where we get to go next with his character. I'm going to miss Celebrimbor for sure because he was so interesting. And the development that we got to see with his kind of downfall and hubris was really cool throughout this season. And then before we wrap up, the Gandalf stuff. So as we found out this season, which we've been pretty sure about since season 1, the stranger is Gandalf. And while it's somewhat of a surprise, but not really, I was like, this guy's got to be Gandalf. I'll be curious to see what we do with it. I think it was kind of a waste of an entire season's worth of storyline to do some kind of build up to that, as we were pretty sure that's who he was. But nonetheless, it's cool that Gandalf is going to be in this series. It'll be interesting to see a younger version of the character. Tom Bombadil was cool. It was fun to hear his songs, see just an actual on-screen portrayal of the character was cool, because we didn't get to see that in The Lord of the Rings. But like I said, the overall journey it doesn't feel worth it to include it in the show anymore to me, with especially the Harfa stuff. Like, now that Gandalf is like knowing who he is and doing his own thing, and the Harfoots are doing their own thing, it's like, well, good gravy. I really hope we don't have to have another split up storyline of here's what Gandalf's up to, and hey, remember those Harfoots you don't really care about? Let's see what they're up to. So, I mean, I'm really interested to see a lot of the different storylines as we move into season 3 coming next. And there's others I'm hoping we can get some improvements on, because like I said, they're not inherently bad stories. They're all interesting and good enough stories to great stories. I just think they need to do a better job balancing them. I think in some sense, there's too much going on story-wise. I think they're all revolving around the events of and the re-rise to power of Sauron, which makes sense that you want to get all these different perspectives and cultures and the way that this is all happening for them. But I think when the show is focused on the rings of power, the forging of those Sauron, all of that stuff is when it's at its best. And so I think while we do need to see the effects that it's having on other people and other cultures throughout Middle-earth, they need to do a better job with those stories. So while I overall really thought we got another good, if not great season at somewhere around an 8 out of 10 or so, there's still some improvements to be made, which is good. I think there's always should be room for improvement. but I did really enjoy this season overall. So as I wrap things up, let me know in the comments down below what you thought of this season. If you're going to spoil something, please give a spoiler warning for it before you do so. Thank you for sticking around to the end of this video. I'll see you in the next one.